The conference room smelled of lemon polish and stale coffee. The air conditioning hummed, a low, steady vibration against the heavy oak table. I sat at the head of that table. I am 37 years old. My name is Shelby Aldridge. I am a senior forensic accountant for a firm that dismantles corporate fraud for a living. Today, the fraud on the table belonged to my sister. Under the harsh yellow fluorescent lights, my left hand rested on a 3-inch thick folder. My fingers gripped a silver ballpoint pen. Click, click, click. A habit from my junior audit days. The metal felt cold against my skin. My wedding band caught the light. White gold, plain. I bought it myself with my own money. I looked down the length of the empty mahogany wood. 15 years ago, my father brought us to this office for the first time. Paige ran straight to the leather executive chair at this very spot. She spun around in it, laughing loud and bright. I stood in the doorway holding my notebooks. Now, I occupied the seat of power, and I felt nothing but a hollow ache behind my ribs. The victory tasted like ash. Footsteps echoed in the hallway outside, sharp heels clicking rapidly on marble. The heavy glass door swung open. Paige stopped dead. She wore a tailored navy suit. Her hair fell in perfect highlighted waves. Her expensive perfume entered the room before she did, but her confidence vanished the second her eyes darted from the unnamed outside counsel sitting to my right, then down to the massive audit report under my hands, and finally up to my face. She held a temporary plastic visitor badge. Security had confiscated her executive pass at the lobby 5 minutes ago. Her fingers went slack. The plastic badge hit the carpet with a dull thud. She did not pick it up. 1 second passed. 2, 3. She opened her mouth. No sound came out. She closed it again. The color drained completely from her cheeks, leaving her looking small and terrified. I did not smile. I did not speak. I had prepared for 90 days for this exact moment. I had traced every hidden bank account, every forged invoice, every lie, but looking at her standing there, completely broken, I just wanted the silence to end. 93 days ago, I got married without my family. The ink from my fountain pen had gleamed wet on the thick cream paper. I sat at my kitchen table, addressing wedding invitations. The warm glow of the desk lamp pushed back the evening shadows of my apartment. From the living room, the low murmur of a public radio broadcast drifted in. Marcus was listening to the evening news. He flipped a page of his book every few minutes, a comforting, predictable rhythm. I pulled another heavy envelope from the stack. I traced the calligraphy carefully. The scent of the ink grounded me. I looked up. Down the short hallway of our apartment, my college graduation portrait hung on the wall. Summa cum laude. I was the only person who kept that photo on display. At my parents' house, there were 7 pictures on the mantel. I was in 2 of them, always pushed to the very edge of the frame, cropped out of the center. I picked up a small card. I wrote a single line for my mother. I left a chair for you. I slipped the card into the envelope. My phone buzzed against the wood. The screen lit up. Mom. I set the pen down. My hands felt suddenly very cold. I pressed the answer button. Hello, Mom, I said. Sweetie, I got your little invitation. Her voice floated through the speaker. Light, airy, coded in that Virginia charm she saved for difficult conversations. It is beautiful. Thank you, Mom, I said. The thing is, Paige got her promotion. Her tone shifted. The real reason for the call arrived right on schedule. The party is that same weekend. The whole family is going. Your father is giving a speech for her. I stared at the stack of envelopes. My jaw locked tight. The grinding pressure moved up to my temples. My wedding is that weekend, I said. I know, sweetie. A heavy sigh echoed on her end, the kind of sigh meant to show infinite patience with a stubborn child. But this is a vice president position. At her age, she is the one worth celebrating right now. You understand. I looked back at the hallway, at the graduation photo. 15 years ago, at my graduation dinner, my mother stood up with a champagne glass. She looked at 20 guests and said that Paige had the gift, while Shelby had persistence. Everyone laughed. Nobody meant it maliciously, but the map had been drawn that night. Paige had the gift. Paige was worth celebrating. I pressed 2 fingers against the side of my head. The drumming in my ears grew louder. "Congratulations," I said. "Oh, sweetie, do not be like that. We will do dinner after the weekend and we can figure something out." I said congratulations. My voice came out flat, empty. A perfect imitation of nothing. I mean it. Give Paige my best. I ended the call. I placed the phone face down on the table. My hands did not shake. My face held no expression at all. I stood up carefully, pushing the chair back without making a sound. I walked past the living room where Marcus sat reading. I went straight into the bathroom. I turned the sink faucet on full blast. I closed the door behind me. I sat on the edge of the bathtub for 20 minutes. The water roared against the porcelain, hiding whatever sounds I might have made. I stared at the bathroom tiles until the lines blurred. When I finally turned the faucet off, the apartment felt too quiet. I opened the door. Marcus stood in the kitchen. He had not knocked. He knew better than to knock. He held 2 mugs of tea. The steam curled into the cool air. My eyes burned, but my voice held steady. "We are getting married with whoever shows up," I told him. "If it is 12 people, it is 12 people." Marcus set the mugs down on the counter. He walked over and stopped just a few inches from me. He looked down with those steady brown eyes. "I would marry you in a parking lot," he said. I let out a breath that caught sharply in my throat. Do not tempt me. It was the first half smile I managed all day. I took the tea from his hands. The ceramic felt warm against my cold palms. I thought the pain of that phone call was the end of the story. I thought walking away from them was the final chapter. I was wrong. The following Monday, I sat in a cubicle on the 4th floor of the Mercer Hollis Logistics building with a fake last name and a very real audit trail. That was how the real work began. But the path to that conference room really began 2 months earlier, on a warm Saturday evening in a Charlotte backyard. We were married at the county courthouse that morning. The reception was just a small gathering behind a friend's house. The air smelled of smoked hickory and sweet barbecue sauce. Strings of exposed Edison bulbs hung between the large oak trees, casting a warm and golden light over the grass. 14 guests stood around talking and drinking craft beer. The steady, easy rhythm of their laughter filled the yard. We had rented 2 long wooden tables. I sat next to Marcus. Right beside my seat, there was a single, empty, folding chair. I did not ask the rental company for an extra. I simply unfolded it and placed it there myself before anyone arrived. My college roommate walked over and handed me a paper plate filled with potato salad. She looked around the small yard, counting the faces, and then her eyes landed on the empty wooden seat. "No family?" she asked, keeping her voice carefully low. I looked across the grass. Marcus was standing near the fence, laughing at a joke one of his engineering friends had just made. He looked completely at ease. "The ones that matter are here," I told her. I turned my attention back to the empty chair. I did not leave it for my father. I did not leave it for Paige. I left it for the woman who raised me. I left it because no matter how much you know better, a small part of you still expects your mother to show up. The chair remained empty for the entire night. Later, as someone turned up the music from a portable speaker, I felt a sharp vibration against my leg. I pulled my phone from my pocket. The screen illuminated my face in the dark. It was a new email from Helen Park, the managing partner at Whitfield & Associates. The subject line read, "Urgent engagement." The message itself was brief. "Major new client, Charlotte-based. I need your team on Monday morning. Details attached." I did not open the attachment. I locked the screen and slipped the phone away. When I looked up, Marcus was watching me from across the yard. He did not ask what the message said, but I saw the slight shift in his posture. He knew the outside world had just stepped into our backyard. I would not find out until much later what was happening across town at that exact moment. While I stood under the string lights with my husband, my father was sitting alone in his dark home office. His laptop screen was open, glowing white and casting harsh shadows across his face. From the hallway, my mother called out his name. She told him to hurry up, that they were going to be late for the promotion party, late to celebrate their golden child. My father flinched at the sound of her voice. He snapped the laptop shut instantly, leaving whatever was on that screen hidden in the dark. On Monday morning, I sat at my desk in the Whitfield and Associates office. The building was quiet. I opened the physical file Helen had left for me. The client name was printed in bold black ink across the top page. Mercer Hollis Logistics Group. I stopped breathing for a full second. I stared at the letters until they blurred. My father and Victor Hollis had built that company from the ground up. I had used my maiden name, Mercer, on all my university records, but my entire professional career was built strictly under my married name. Nobody at my firm knew the connection. The file outlined a board-requested internal audit, preempting a preliminary inquiry from the Securities and Exchange Commission. The professional guidelines were absolutely clear. I had a strict obligation to disclose the conflict of interest. I needed to stand up, walk into the managing partner's office, hand the file back, and walk away from the engagement. But if I withdrew, Helen would assign another senior auditor. She would send someone who did not know the layout of the fourth-floor finance department, someone who did not know the vendor history, someone who could easily be blinded by a vice president with a perfect blowout and a charming smile. Paige would spin a beautiful narrative, and a stranger would buy it without a second thought. I touched the thick paper of the folder. I thought about the empty folding chair in the backyard. I thought about the graduation photo hanging in my hallway, and the exact tone of my mother's voice when she called me persistent. If I stayed, I would be risking my license. I would be risking the career I built from nothing. I closed the folder. I pulled a fresh legal pad toward me. I picked up my silver ballpoint pen. I will take it. By the middle of the following week, I was standing in the lobby of the Mercer Hollis Logistics Group building. 2 junior auditors from my firm walked beside me, carrying our encrypted laptops. We were escorted up to the fourth-floor finance department. I had not stepped foot in this building since I was a child, but my body remembered the layout. The walls had been repainted a sterile corporate gray. The company logo behind the reception desk was sleek and modernized. But as we walked up the back stairwell, the 5th step still groaned under my weight, exactly like it had when I was 12 years old. They placed us in a windowless conference room. The air smelled of old commercial carpet and bitter coffee drifting in from the break room down the hall. Through the thin walls, the relentless clatter of keyboards created a low, buzzing hum. I opened my legal pad. I clicked my silver ballpoint pen. Once, twice. The metallic sound anchored me. We began the audit. For the first 2 weeks, the work was purely methodical. I sifted through mountains of revenue reports, expense reimbursements, and vendor contracts. My pen flew across the pages, documenting every discrepancy, cross-referencing every date, building an impenetrable foundation. The junior auditors handled the basic reconciliations, while I dug into the executive discretionary spending. Then, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, the numbers stopped making sense. I found 3 vendor contracts filed under a consulting firm named Prism Solutions. The invoices were perfectly round numbers: $25,000, $50,000. In corporate logistics, nothing ever costs a perfectly round number down to the cent. I searched the shared drives for the corresponding project files. There was no documentation of any actual deliverables. No project scopes, no communication records, just clean, even payments sent out right at the end of every fiscal quarter, exactly when the company needed to meet its revenue reporting deadlines to the board of directors. I pulled the physical payment authorizations from the archive boxes. The paper felt heavy and stiff in my hands. I followed the approval chain to the bottom right corner of the page. Every single one of those fraudulent invoices bore the exact same authorizing signature. Paige Mercer, Vice President of Operations. I stared at her, looping, elegant handwriting in blue ink. I leaned back in my chair. I waited for the shock to hit me, but my pulse remained completely steady. I was not surprised. I was only surprised by how entirely unsurprised I felt. Somewhere deep down, I must have always known that the gap between us was not just about talent. Paige had the gift, just like my mother always said, but I had the integrity, and my integrity was currently looking at a federal crime. By the 3rd week of the investigation, the edges of my life at home began to blur. I arrived at the apartment long after dark. I stopped listening to the evening radio broadcasts. Even sitting on our living room sofa, ignoring the dinner Marcus had cooked, I found myself holding my silver ballpoint pen. I clicked it unconsciously against my notebook while I stared at the blank television screen. Marcus noticed. He always noticed everything. He came into the living room one night and sat next to me on the cushions. He watched my hand gripping the metal barrel of the pen. "You have not told me a single thing about this new case," Marcus said. His voice was gentle, but the observation was sharp. I kept my eyes on the dark television screen. "I cannot." He watched my profile for a long moment. "Cannot or will not?" I stopped clicking the pen. I looked at him. Both. He did not push me to explain. He never demanded more than I could give. He just reached over and placed his warm hand over my cold fingers, stilling the silver pen before I could click it again. "Whatever it is," Marcus said quietly, "do not lose yourself in it." Later that night, I lay completely still in our bed. The room was perfectly dark. I kept my eyes open, staring at the ceiling shadows. I was auditing my own sister. I was peeling back the layers of her perfect, golden life, and I was doing it better than anyone else in the city could. For the first time in 15 years, the word persistence did not feel like an insult. It felt like a weapon. By the 7th week of the investigation, the Whitfield and Associates office became my second home. I sat at my desk long after the cleaning crew had vacuumed the carpets and turned off the overhead lights. Only the blue glow of my dual monitors illuminated the dark room. My external hard drive spun with a low, constant hum, processing thousands of transaction records. I reached for my third cup of coffee. It was completely cold. I drank it anyway, letting the bitter taste sharpen my focus. I was hunting a ghost through a maze of corporate filings, and the trail was finally getting warm. The ghost had a name: Prism Solutions. I spent 3 hours tracing the vendor payments through a labyrinth of shell corporations. The paper trail led straight to Wilmington, Delaware, a classic privacy state setup. People who wanted to hide stolen corporate funds always went to Delaware. They hid their identities behind registered agents and anonymous post office boxes. But people who stole money usually made one fundamental mistake when it came time to actually spend it. They wanted it close. I pulled the banking records we had subpoenaed earlier that week. I cross-referenced the routing numbers on the cleared checks. The Delaware Shell Company funneled every single cent directly into a commercial checking account at a Wells Fargo branch right here in Charlotte. My heart beat a steady, methodical rhythm against my ribs. I clicked open the digital signature card for that local bank account. There it was. P. Mercer. My sister did not even bother to use a fake name. I stared at the looping, elegant script of her signature on the high-resolution scan. It was the same handwriting that used to forge my parents' signatures on her high school report cards. It was either breathtaking arrogance or profound stupidity, and knowing Paige, it was likely a dangerous combination of both. She honestly believed she would never be caught. She believed the rules did not apply to her because they never had. I ran the final aggregation on the master spreadsheet. The total amount redirected through those vendor kickbacks over 3 years came to exactly $347,000. It was not $1 million. It was not enough money to buy a private island or a fleet of sports cars, but it was more than enough for federal fraud charges. The financial reporting for Mercer Hollis was heavily regulated by the Securities and Exchange Commission, which meant she had committed a serious felony. I had the complete evidentiary chain. My report was practically finished. I could hand it to the board of directors tomorrow morning. The logistics firm would be wiped clean. Paige would be exposed. The truth would finally be documented, verified, and undeniable. I had won. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and rubbed my tired eyes. But something still pulled at the back of my mind, a small thread hanging loose from the tapestry of the investigation. The entire internal audit had been triggered by an anonymous tip sent to the Securities and Exchange Commission 4 months ago. The board of directors had provided our firm with the preliminary inquiry file, which included the basic metadata from that initial complaint. I opened the metadata document. I ran a basic trace on the originating Internet Protocol address. If a competitor or a disgruntled finance employee had reported her, the source would ping back to a corporate server or a secure virtual private network. The trace completed. The screen populated with a routing prefix. It was a residential address. I frowned at the glowing text. A corporate competitor would not file a federal complaint from their living room sofa. A whistleblower inside the accounting department would know better than to use their home internet connection. I picked up my silver ballpoint pen. I pulled my legal pad closer and wrote down a single note. Follow up on residential source. I underlined the words twice. The crisp sound of the pen scratching against the paper sounded unusually loud in the empty office. A cold knot formed in my stomach. The victory suddenly felt fragile. I packed my laptop into my heavy leather bag and left the building. The drive back to our apartment was a blur of empty streets and yellow streetlights bleeding through the windshield. When I unlocked the front door, the air smelled faintly of the garlic and olive oil Marcus had used for dinner hours ago. Only one lamp was on in the living room. Marcus was lying on the sofa, reading a thick hardcover biography. He marked his page and sat up as I dropped my keys into the ceramic bowl by the door. "Good day?" he asked. His voice was thick with sleep. I walked into the living room and dropped my heavy bag onto the hardwood floor. I found everything. Marcus looked at me. He studied the deep tension in my shoulders, the dark circles under my eyes, and the way my hands rested rigidly at my sides. He set his book down on the coffee table. "You do not look like someone who found everything." I sat down on the edge of the table, facing him. I took off my wire-framed glasses and pressed the heels of my hands against my closed eyelids. "Finding it was the easy part," I said, my voice muffled behind my hands. "What I do with it is the part I cannot sleep through." Marcus leaned forward. He rested his elbows on his knees, bringing his face closer to mine. "I noticed something earlier today," he said quietly. He pointed toward the dark hallway behind me. "Your graduation picture, the one from university." I lowered my hands. I turned my head and looked down the corridor where the framed photograph hung on the wall. "What about it?" I asked. "You have had an office at Whitfield for 5 years," Marcus said. "A beautiful office with mahogany shelves and a locked door. You have credentials and certificates framed in there, but you never took that picture to work. You kept it right there in our hallway. Why?" I stared at the silver frame shining faintly in the shadows. "I do not know, but I did know. I looked at that picture every single morning before I walked out the door, and every single night when I came home, I wanted to walk past it. I needed to see the gold seal on the diploma, summa cum laude. I needed the daily reminder that I was not just the girl with persistence. I was the girl who earned her place in the world." I looked back at my husband. He was watching me with an expression of deep, quiet understanding. I had spent the last 7 weeks building an airtight case against my sister. I thought the evidence would finally validate me. I thought proving her wrong would automatically prove I was right. But sitting there in the quiet safety of my own home, feeling the heavy weight of that residential internet address lingering in my notebook, a terrible realization began to settle over my chest. Proving my sister was a thief was not going to make my mother love me more. It was never going to erase the empty chair at my wedding. And the truth I had just uncovered was only the very beginning of the wreckage. By the 8th week, the quiet cooperation of the Mercer Hollis Finance Department evaporated. I sat in the windowless conference room on the 4th floor, staring at a gray error box on my screen. The server connection had timed out. I refreshed the directory. The spinning wheel icon froze, and another error message popped up. Access denied. I walked down the hall to the Information Technology Department. The head administrator, a young man who could not meet my eyes, mumbled an apology while staring at his keyboard. He claimed his team could not locate 2 of the main file servers. He said a routine maintenance script had somehow corrupted the vendor records for the 2nd quarter of the previous year. Data did not just corrupt itself during an active federal inquiry. Someone was burning the paper trail. I went back to my temporary desk. I bypassed the main graphical interface and pulled the raw administrative access logs from the backup cache. I scanned the timestamp data from the previous night. At 2 in the morning, a user had logged into the archive directory and initiated a mass deletion protocol. The specific user identification code belonged to the Vice President of Operations, Paige. She did not know my name was printed on the auditor badge, but she knew the firm was closing in. The instinct of the favored child was not to confess or negotiate. Her instinct was to erase the evidence and rewrite the story. It was exactly what my mother had taught her to do her entire life. The deleted files could be recovered through digital forensics, but that required significant time. More importantly, it required a legal subpoena if the board of directors refused to cooperate. My father was the chief executive officer. He had remained completely silent for 8 weeks. I could not count on his cooperation. I picked up my cell phone and called Helen Park. The managing partner picked up on the second ring. I gave her the cold facts. I explained the sudden server outage and the targeted data destruction. If they are actively destroying evidence, we escalate to the board immediately, Helen said. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the static of the line. We will draft the preservation demand this afternoon. And Shelby, listen to me. I held my breath. My grip on the smooth plastic of the phone tightened. This is a sensitive escalation, Helen continued. If there is anything about this engagement I should know, any conflict or connection that could compromise our standing, now is the time to tell me. The ethical boundary stood right in front of me. All I had to do was step over it and walk away clean. I could tell her the chief executive officer was my father. I could confess that the executive destroying the files was the sister I had cut out of my life 2 months ago. If I spoke those words, the audit would be handed to a stranger. Paige would smile, spin a beautiful story about a technical misunderstanding, and slip right through their fingers. There is nothing, I said. I hung up the phone. I had just violated the core mandate of my profession. I sat in the silent room and felt absolutely nothing but the cold, hollow drive to finish what I had started. By the 9th week, the investigation consumed every waking hour of my day. Late one night, I sat alone in my permanent office at Whitfield & Associates. The building was completely dark, except for the glow of my dual monitors. The city of Charlotte slept outside my window. I opened the metadata file from the original Securities and Exchange Commission tip. The residential Internet Protocol address stared back at me. I ran a reverse lookup through our investigative database. A green progress bar filled the center of my screen. I picked up my coffee mug, realizing too late that it was empty. I set the ceramic cup down on the wooden desk. The progress bar vanished. A physical address populated the display. 4217 Laurel Ridge Drive. I stopped breathing. The low hum of the air conditioning faded into a high, ringing pitch in my ears. I read the text again. 4217 Laurel Ridge Drive. It was a large, colonial-style brick house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The property featured manicured lawns and a wide concrete driveway. It was the house where I grew up. It was my parents' house. My hands felt entirely numb. I pressed my palms flat against the cold surface of my desk. I pulled the secondary metadata file provided by the board's legal counsel. It contained the browser history associated with the anonymous complaint. The user had accessed the federal portal 3 separate times in a single week. The timestamps were exactly 4 months old. 4 months ago, long before I mailed my wedding invitations. Long before my mother called to tell me they were skipping my courthouse ceremony to attend a country club celebration. My father sent the tip. He used a temporary email address from his home office computer. The man had known everything. My quiet, stoic father, who always managed to look away when my mother handed Paige the largest slice of cake, possessed the full knowledge that his favored daughter was stealing from their own company. He knew she was inflating the revenue. The chief executive officer knew she was a fraud. And yet, that same man still put on a tailored suit. He still stood up in front of their wealthy friends. He still gave a toast celebrating her promotion to vice president. He chose to attend a party honoring a thief instead of walking his other daughter down the aisle. The pain did not hit me like a sudden physical blow. It seeped into my bones like freezing rain. For 15 years, I had told myself a very specific story to survive the dynamic of my family. I believed they favored my sister because she was charming, because she was beautiful, because she fit the perfect narrative of a successful daughter. I thought they simply could not see past her bright, polished surface, but my father saw the truth. He saw the rotting, corrupt core of her success, and he chose her anyway. He chose her over the truth. My own father chose her over me. Courage was never his strong suit. The man lacked the spine to confront her directly. He could not bear to tell his wife that her perfect child was a criminal. Instead, the patriarch of our family hid behind an anonymous web form, hoping a faceless federal agency would clean up his mess so he would not have to look his daughter in the eye and hold her accountable. The betrayal hollowed me out completely. The persistent hope I had carried for nearly 2 decades, the secret belief that if I just worked hard enough, if I just proved my absolute integrity, they would finally see my value, crumbled into ash. The standard was never about who was better or who was right. There was absolutely nothing I could ever achieve that would make them choose me. I sat in the dark office and stared at the address on the screen. The relationship between a father and a daughter died right there, illuminated only by the harsh blue light of a computer monitor. I closed the metadata file. I dragged the cursor to the top corner of the screen and shut down the computer. The dual monitors went completely black, leaving me sitting in the dark with my own reflection. I did not move for several minutes. I just watched the pale outline of my face in the glass. The silence in the Whitfield & Associates office was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning vents above my head. I finally stood up. My legs felt incredibly heavy. I packed my encrypted laptop into my leather bag, snapped the brass buckles shut, and walked out of the room. I bypassed the elevators. I needed to move. I needed the physical exertion of the stairs to keep my hands from shaking. The heavy security doors clicked shut behind me as I stepped out into the parking lot. The North Carolina spring night wrapped around me like a wet blanket. A brief, heavy rainstorm had passed through Charlotte while I was hunting through those financial records. The air was thick with humidity and the sharp, metallic smell of wet asphalt. High above, rows of yellow sodium vapor lights buzzed with a steady electric drone. They cast long, sickly shadows across the empty pavement. My car sat entirely alone under the glare. I unlocked the doors and slid into the driver's seat. The heavy thud of the car door closing sealed me inside. I did not turn the key in the ignition. I sat in the quiet dark and placed both hands flat against the top of the steering wheel. The leather was cold. My white gold wedding band pressed hard against the material. The metal felt like a piece of ice against my skin. I stared through the windshield at the empty parking spaces. I was forced to look directly at the reality I had spent 15 years trying to avoid. I had built my entire adult life on a fundamental misunderstanding. I earned my accounting degree, secured my position at a prestigious firm, and worked 80-hour weeks because I believed my family operated on a system of merit. I thought I was pushed aside because I lacked a certain natural charm. I thought my mother favored Paige because Paige possessed a special, effortless gift for business. I honestly believed that if I just worked hard enough, if I gathered enough undeniable proof of my own competence, my parents would finally look at me and admit they had made a mistake. But the truth was glowing right there in that residential internet protocol address. My family did not value competence. They did not care about the truth. They cared about the narrative. My mother had spent 30 years carefully writing a beautiful script for our family. In her script, Paige was the brilliant, glowing success story. She was the vice president of operations, the golden child who could do no wrong. That was the story my mother performed at every country club dinner, every church picnic, and every holiday gathering. I was not exiled because I was difficult. I was exiled because I was the inconvenient evidence that her beautiful script was a complete lie, and my father knew it. That was the detail that made my chest ache so deeply I could barely draw a breath. Douglas Mercer knew the entire story was rotten from the inside out. He had seen the forged invoices. He had seen the shell companies. He knew his youngest daughter was stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars from the logistics company he built from nothing. But standing beside me meant he would have to admit his wife was wrong. It meant tearing down the entire foundation of his own house. It meant looking at his friends and business partners and confessing that his perfect family was a fraud. He was terrified of the fallout. The patriarch of our family was a profound coward. He would rather destroy his golden child from the shadows, hiding behind a burner email address and a federal complaint portal, than look at me in the daylight and say he was sorry. He chose the comfort of the lie over the reality of his oldest daughter. He sat in the front row at her promotion party, raised a glass of expensive champagne, and toasted a thief. I pressed my forehead against the cold leather of the steering wheel. I closed my eyes. A strange, terrifying lightness began to spread through my chest, the desperate need for their validation, the heavy, exhausting burden I had carried on my shoulders since that graduation dinner 15 years ago, simply stopped breathing. It died right there in the front seat of my car. They were never going to see me. I could expose Paige. I could expose my father. I could lay all $347,000 of stolen corporate money out on their pristine dining room table, and they would still find a way to rewrite the story without me. They would make Paige the victim of a misunderstanding. They would make me the villain who tore the family apart. I lifted my head. I let out a long, slow breath. The windshield was beginning to fog up from the damp heat. If my family was never going to give me the validation I wanted, I had to figure out exactly why I was sitting in a dark parking lot at midnight. I had to decide why I was going to finish this investigation. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my cell phone. The screen lit up the dark interior of the car. I dialed the only number that mattered. Marcus answered on the first ring. His voice was heavy with sleep, but completely clear. "It is midnight," Marcus said. "My dad sent the tip," I told him. My voice sounded completely different to my own ears. Stripped bare, quiet, resolute. He knew. About all of it. Silence stretched over the line. I could hear the faint sound of him sitting up in bed, the rustle of the cotton sheets. I could practically see his mind working, putting the timeline together. "And he still went to her party," Marcus said softly. "And he still went to her party," I repeated. The rain started to fall again. Small, scattered drops hit the roof of my car with a hollow tapping sound. "So what are you going to do?" he asked. I looked down at my hands. I looked at the plain wedding band that I had bought for myself. "I am going to finish the audit," I said. "Not for them. Not to prove anything to people who refuse to open their eyes. I am going to finish it because the numbers do not lie, even when everyone else does. I am doing it because it is exactly what I was hired to do." Marcus did not ask if I was sure. He did not offer empty platitudes about family or forgiveness. He understood exactly what had just broken and exactly what had taken its place. "Come home," Marcus said quietly. I ended the call. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, the headlights cutting a bright, clean path through the dark parking lot, and I finally drove away from them. I walked into Helen Park's office at Whitfield & Associates the following Monday morning before the sun had fully cleared the Charlotte skyline. The air in the building was crisp and smelled faintly of floor wax and the professional silence of a high-stakes firm. Helen was already at her desk, a steam rising from a ceramic mug, her eyes sharp behind her reading glasses. She did not look up when I stepped into the room, but she gestured toward the empty chair across from her. I did not sit down immediately. I stood by the window and looked at the long, morning shadows stretching across the pavement far below. I had carried the truth about my connection to Mercer Hollis Logistics for 10 weeks, and the weight of it had finally become an obstacle to the work itself. I needed to put it down. "Helen," I said, my voice sounding flat and steady in the quiet room. "I have a full disclosure to make regarding the Mercer Hollis engagement." Helen slowly lowered her glasses. She leaned back in her leather chair, the springs creaking under her weight. She waited, her expression unreadable. "Mercer Hollis is my family's company," I told her. I watched her eyes for any sign of shock, but there was only a narrowing of her gaze. "The chief executive officer, Douglas Mercer, is my father. The vice president of operations, Paige Mercer, is my sister. I should have disclosed this on day one." The silence that followed was heavy and cold. It lasted for nearly a minute. Helen did not blink. She just stared at me, her mind clearly running through the ethical liabilities, the professional risks, and the potential for a catastrophic malpractice suit. "How long have you known?" Helen finally asked. Her voice was lower than usual, stripped of its typical professional warmth. Since the moment I opened the file, I admitted. "You should have disclosed immediately," she said. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact that hung in the air like a physical barrier between us. "You know the mandates of this firm, Shelby. You know the state board requirements. Why did you stay on?" "Because I knew I was the only one who could see the pattern," I said. I did not apologize. I did not make excuses about family trauma or personal wounds. I kept my focus on the evidence. I knew how Paige would try to spin the narrative. I knew exactly where she would hide the trails because I grew up watching her hide things from our parents. If I had walked away, she would have charmed a stranger into overlooking the discrepancies. "The audit is clean, Helen. Every finding is documented. Every bank account is cross-referenced. The numbers do not change because of who I am, but who I am is why I found them." Helen stood up and walked to the window. She stood with her back to me for a long time. I waited, my hands resting at my sides. I was prepared for her to fire me on the spot. I was prepared to lose the license I had spent 15 years building. "I will have to issue a formal reprimand," Helen said, still staring at the city. "There will be a permanent letter in your personnel file, and I will have to present the findings to the Mercer-Hollis board personally, with a full disclosure of your connection. But the audit stands. I have reviewed your work myself over the last 48 hours. It is the most thorough, by-the-book investigation I have seen in 20 years. Withdrawing it now would cause more legal damage than moving forward." She turned around and looked at me. "You took a massive risk with this firm's reputation, Shelby. Do not ever do it again." "I understand," I said. I felt a strange sense of relief, but it was not the relief of a victory. It was the relief of accountability. I had accepted the price of the truth. 2 weeks later, 93 days after the Saturday, I spent sitting at a kitchen table addressing wedding invitations. I returned to the Mercer-Hollis Logistics Group headquarters. I was no longer the hidden observer on the 4th floor. I walked through the lobby with the outside legal counsel for the board of directors. The security guard, the same one who had ignored me for 3 months, stood up and held the door open for us. I did not look at him. I kept my eyes on the elevator doors. The conference room on the executive floor was exactly as I remembered it from my flash forward. The scent of lemon furniture polish was thick in the air, mixed with the faint, metallic tang of the ventilation system. I sat at the head of the long mahogany table. I placed the 3-inch thick audit report directly in front of me. My father entered the room first. He looked older than he had on the night he had called to tell me he was skipping my wedding. His shoulders were slumped, and his face was a pale, sickly gray. He saw me sitting at the head of the table and stopped in his tracks. He did not say a word. He did not offer a greeting. He simply dropped his gaze to the floor and walked to the very end of the table, sitting as far away from me as the room would allow. He looked like a man waiting for a sentencing hearing. Then came the scent of Tom Ford perfume. Paige walked into the room 5 minutes later. She was dressed in a tailored cream suit, her hair a perfect masterpiece of highlights and soft waves. She was smiling, her eyes bright with the practiced confidence of the golden child. She saw the board members, she saw the outside counsel, and then her eyes landed on me. Paige froze. The smile did not fade so much as it simply disintegrated. She looked at my face, then down at the auditor badge clipped to my lapel, and then at the massive folder under my hand. "This is a joke," Paige said. Her voice was high and sharp, vibrating with a sudden, frantic energy. "Sit down, Paige," I said. She turned toward our father, her hands shaking as she gripped her designer handbag. "Dad, what is this? Did you know she was doing this? Why is she here?" Douglas did not look up. He kept his eyes fixed on his own hands, which were tightly interlaced on the table. "Sit down," he muttered. His voice was barely a whisper. "I am calling my lawyer," Paige snapped. She reached for her phone. "Miss Mercer," the outside counsel said, his voice cold and clinical. "This is a board-authorized presentation of audit findings. You may have your own counsel present at a subsequent meeting, but today, you will listen. Please take a seat." Paige sat. She did not lean back. She perched on the edge of the leather chair like a bird ready to take flight. I opened the folder. I did not look at her while I spoke. I kept my voice professional, stripped of any personal history or old resentment. I presented the numbers. I outlined the $347,000 that had been funneled through Prism Solutions over 36 months. I detailed the shell company registration in Delaware and the Wells Fargo checking account in Charlotte. I presented the signatures. Every forged invoice, every quarterly revenue inflation, every deliberate lie was laid out on the mahogany table in clear, black and white documentation. "Those are standard consulting fees," Paige interrupted, her voice trembling. "Everyone does it. It is how you manage growth in a stagnating market. Dad, tell them. Tell them it was strategic." I did not wait for my father to answer. I knew he wouldn't. "Prism Solutions has no employees," I said, looking directly at her. "It has no office, no deliverables, and no existence outside of a post office box in Wilmington. The signatory on the bank account is you, Paige. The funds were used for personal travel, designer apparel, and a down payment on a beach house that is not listed in the company's asset registry. This is not strategic management. This is federal fraud." I watched her face. For a single, fleeting second, the polished mask of the vice president of operations fell away. I saw the 12-year-old girl who had been caught cheating on her math exam. I saw the same wide, frantic eyes searching the room for someone to save her. Paige turned to our father again. Her voice dropped to a desperate whisper. "Dad, say something. Tell them she is lying. You know how she is. She has always been jealous. She is just doing this because of the wedding." Douglas Mercer finally lifted his head. He did not look at Paige. He did not look at me. He looked at the outside counsel. "The board will refer these findings to the Securities and Exchange Commission immediately," the counsel announced. "Miss Mercer, your employment with Mercer Hollis Logistics Group is terminated, effective immediately. You will be escorted from the building by security. Your exit interview and the discussion of legal proceedings will occur through your legal representative." Paige stood up. She did not look at the board members. She did not look at the lawyers. She walked toward my father. "You knew," she whispered. The realization seemed to hit her like a physical blow. "You were the one who sent the tip. You were the one who started this." Douglas flinched. It was a small movement, just a slight tightening of his jaw, but it was enough to confirm the truth. Paige stared at him for a long moment, her face twisted in a mixture of shock and pure, unadulterated betrayal. Then, without a word, she turned and walked out of the room. She did not pick up her visitor badge. She did not look back. The room was silent. I looked down at the silver ballpoint pen in my hand. I thought about the graduation card she had given me 15 years ago. "For all your lists, nerd." I thought about the 3 months I had spent living as a stranger in my own family's company. I thought about the empty chair in the backyard. I had found the truth. I had documented it. I had witnessed it. But as I sat at the head of the mahogany table, watching my father refuse to meet my eyes, I realized that the numbers had done exactly what I had always known they would do. They had told the truth, and the truth had finished the work of destroying my family. I did not feel a sense of triumph. I only felt a deep, quiet exhaustion. It was finally over. The heavy glass doors of the conference room clicked shut as the board members and outside counsel filed out into the hallway, leaving a vacuum of silence in their wake. I stood at the head of the table, my fingers tracing the textured grain of the mahogany wood. I began to pack my things, sliding the thick audit folder into my leather bag and clicking the brass buckles shut. My father remained in his seat at the far end of the table. He looked smaller than he had an hour ago, his frame hunched in a way that made his expensive suit look 3 sizes too large. As I turned to leave, walking past the rows of empty chairs, his voice cut through the stillness. "Shelby." I stopped. I did not turn around completely, but I tilted my head just enough to acknowledge him. I waited, my hand gripping the strap of my bag. "I should have been at your wedding," he said. The words were barely a whisper, vibrating with a weight that was 15 years too late. "Yes," I replied. I did not offer the comfort of a lie. I did not tell him it was okay, because it wasn't. "I did not know how to," he started, his voice trailing off into a jagged sigh. "You did the right thing, Dad," I said, finally turning to face him. "You sent the tip to the federal authorities. You knew Paige was stealing, and you tried to stop it before the whole company went under. That took something, but you sent it anonymously. You could not say it to her face, and you could not come to my wedding, because coming to my wedding meant choosing me over the story Mom tells about this family, and you have never been able to do that." A long beat of silence stretched between us. He did not argue. He did not try to justify his cowardice or explain away the empty chair. For the first time in my life, he simply sat with the cold, hard truth without trying to rewrite it into something more palatable. "That is the part I cannot forgive," I told him. "Not yet." I turned away and walked out of the conference room, my heels clicking a steady, resolute rhythm on the marble floors of Mercer Hollis for the very last time. I did not look back as I pushed through the lobby doors and stepped out into the bright, unforgiving light of the parking lot. By the time I reached our apartment, the evening sun was beginning to dip below the Charlotte skyline, casting long, purple shadows across the brick buildings. I opened the front door and was greeted by the warm, savory scent of the dinner. Marcus was cooking garlic, lemon, and something roasting in the oven. The kitchen lights were amber and soft, and the low murmur of a public radio broadcast hummed from the living room. It felt almost identical to the night I had addressed the invitations, yet everything was different. The kitchen table was clear of envelopes and fountain pens, set instead with 2 simple plates. I sat down at the table. Marcus did not ask how it went. He only had to look at my face to know the work was done. "Hungry?" he asked, setting a glass of water in front of me. "Starving," I admitted. We ate in a comfortable silence for a while. I told him the parts that mattered, the way Paige had looked when the evidence became undeniable, the way the board had moved to terminate her, and the cold efficiency of the legal counsel. When I reached the part about my father, I felt a slight hitch in my breath. "He said he should have been at my wedding," I told him. 15 years late," Marcus said, his voice level. "Better than never," I murmured, "but certainly worse than on time." As I chewed, I thought about what I had lost that day. I had not lost my career. The audit stood, and my professional integrity remained intact despite the formal reprimand in my file. What I had lost was the final, flickering ember of hope that my family would ever truly change. My father knew the truth and still lacked the courage to stand in it. My mother would likely never call, and if she did, she would spend the rest of her life spinning a narrative where I was the villain who tore the family apart. Paige would never look at me with anything other than resentment, but I realized then that I did not need them to see me anymore. It wasn't because the pain had vanished, but because I had finally proven the truth to myself. Persistence was not a consolation prize for the untalented. It was the very thing that had built my career. The thing that had brought me to Marcus, and the thing that had allowed me to sit at the head of that mahogany table for 90 days without breaking. I was sitting there not because of a gift, but because for 15 years I had refused to give up on the truth. I stood up from the table and walked toward the hallway. My college graduation portrait hung there, the silver frame catching the dim light. I had carried this photo with me to every apartment and every condo I had ever owned. I had hung it in this hallway to remind myself every single morning that I was worthy, that the gold seal and the summa cum laude honors meant I was enough. I reached up and unhooked the frame from the wall. I looked at the 22-year-old version of myself. Her hair was longer, and her smile was wider, unaware of the 15 years of silence and labor that lay ahead of her. I felt a strange sense of tenderness for that girl, but I did not need her to hold me up anymore. I walked to the linen closet, opened the top drawer, and placed the photo inside, face down. I did it gently, without anger or drama. "What are you doing?" Marcus called out from the kitchen. "Putting something away," I replied, my voice clear. "I do not need it anymore." I walked back into the hallway and looked at the empty space on the wall. There was nothing there but a small, silver nail and a square of paint that was slightly brighter than the rest. It did not feel like a void. It felt like room for something new. I returned to the kitchen, sat back down with my husband, and listened to the steady, peaceful sound of the radio as we finished our meal together in the home we had built. In the aftermath of Shelby's journey, you are left with a powerful realization that transcends the walls of any corporate boardroom or family home. Your value is never defined by those who are committed to misunderstanding you. For years, you might find yourself trapped in a cycle of seeking validation from a golden child dynamic or an enabler parent, believing that if you just work harder or prove your integrity one more time, the narrative will finally shift in your favor. However, as this story teaches, some people are more invested in the comfort of a lie than the liberation of the truth. When you encounter a family or a workplace that rewards charm over competence and narrative over evidence, the most courageous act of education you can perform is to stop auditioning for their approval. The clear, non-abstract lesson here is that persistence is not a consolation prize for a lack of giftedness. It is the very foundation of a self-built life. While others may rely on shortcuts, fraud, or the protection of enablers, your commitment to the numbers, the hard, unyielding facts of your life and work is what ultimately grants you a seat at the head of the table. You learn that choosing yourself often means accepting the bittersweet reality that some bridges are not meant to be crossed, but burned, so that the smoke can clear the way for your own peace. Like Shelby, you must eventually take down the old graduation photos of your life, those symbolic reminders you keep only to prove your worth to people who aren't looking, and realize that the empty space on the wall isn't a void, but an invitation to define yourself on your own terms. As you reflect on this journey of forensic truth and family fracture, it is worth looking inward at your own story. Have you ever spent years of your life trying to win a game where the rules were rigged against you from the start? Have you ever felt the stinging silence of an empty chair at your greatest moments of triumph, only to realize that the person who wasn't there was actually the one holding you back? We want to hear from you. How did you find the strength to stop seeking validation from those who chose a lie over you? And what did it feel like the moment you finally put that photo away and reclaimed your own narrative? Sharing your experience doesn't just help you heal. It serves as a roadmap for others still standing in the hallway, dunning for a call that may never come.